Hey everybody, welcome. We are gathered here today to once again talk about the Ptolus campaign. I was almost tempted to call it the old Ptolus campaign, but I guess it's we don't want to stress the old despite the gray and some of those beards that I'm seeing.
I feel attacked.
But so with us today are four different players from one of the Ptolus campaigns. There were actually two, and they ran concurrently. But tonight we have with us Andy Collins, Jesse Decker, Bruce Cordell, and Sean Reynolds. And I'm Monte Cook, and I was the DM of the Ptolus campaign and the designer of the product, obviously. And we, as you probably know, we had a very exciting Kickstarter a short time ago to convert Ptolus to both 5e and the Cypher System, and we are doing that. But if you missed out on the Kickstarter, there is still time for you to get in on the BackerKit and still get all the same rewards that anybody who backed the Kickstarter did. So if you're watching and you feel like you missed out, you didn't miss out yet. All right. So the group that the four of you played in together, you guys called yourselves the Company of the Black Lantern. Does anyone want to talk about what the Company of the Black Lantern was kind of all about?
Well, I remember. Go ahead.
I remember we were all elves, and for some reason I think that was even random. It just sort of happened, and we found ourselves teamed up. I don't recall exactly how we got our Black Lantern. It might have involved a dragon or something. I'm not sure.
It got burnt anyway, and it was black.
It was
we needed a name.
Old burnt lantern. Somebody
had a lantern, and in like in the first adventure, like down in the dungeon, I don't know if it was a dragon or I think it was maybe just a trap or something that shot flame and burned it. And for some reason, you guys kept it, and then like the next session, somebody just decided it was the name of the group, and I think no one wanted to argue. No.
And that is how myths are made.
Speaking of myths, there was propaganda even within the group. Remember that I joined late, and the story that I was told was that you were trapped underground for many, many days, and the Black Lantern was the only source of light. And so you all had a special bond to the lantern. Yeah. And therefore, that was the name of the party, even though I had no experience with said lantern.
That sounds like a story that could be true. No, actually, no. I now that you say that strikes me as sounds right. I do remember that there was a point at which I don't remember exactly the circumstances, but like in that first adventure, you guys were actually sealed into a part of the dungeon and couldn't get back up to the city for a while. So if you're totally new to Ptolus, I guess we should also say that, it was at the time a 3rd edition D&D campaign, and we played entirely within the confines of one very, very large fantasy city, but the city had lots and lots of underground dungeon areas underneath it. That kind of the idea was that these dungeons had only recently been opened, only recently been discovered as people started delving down. And so it was kind of almost like a gold rush sort of feel for the adventurers. And so with that came the people who kind of make their money off of gold rush adventurers, who, would literally build like taverns and equipment shops and stuff like that right above the entrance to the dungeon in the city.
It really embraced that dungeon delving aspect of sort of iconic classic D&D. And as I recall, the Company of the Black Lantern leaned into that heavily to the point where we spent, I think, far more time underground than above ground. We got to know those dungeons much more than the people up on the surface.
I think you're absolutely right. ironically, because you were all elves, I think you spent a lot of time in the ancient abandoned dwarven city down there, Dwarven Hearth. Yeah. So go ahead.
Oh, you asked about the sort of, maybe not just the origin, but the essence of the company of the Black Lantern. And I think there's an important thing we haven't emphasized, which was, with my own characters being the exception, the company of Black Lantern was a bunch of jerks.
A little bit true.
I'm not going to dispute that.
We're a little holier than thou in our elvenhoodness.
Yeah.
And it's possible that I'm joking about my character being the exception as well. So.
Well, it was interesting because as a city that, while not exclusively human, was sort of a human-dominated city, I definitely felt at times, from my character's perspective, since I was from somewhere far away, that I wasn't really attached to the city. Like, I was there to make some wealth, right? I wanted to strike it rich. And I remember specifically there was one storyline where, I don't remember the exact details, but like we heard that a barbarian horde is coming to rampage the city, and we were like, I guess we should leave, rather than I guess we should defend the city from the barbarians. Because like, well, they're going to wreck the city. I guess we better not be in the way. That was a good example for me to learn later of like, oh yeah, make sure that your players have sort of their motivations are in line with your expectations.
Well, that's actually, though, a really good example of, so, I was running the game with two concurrent groups, right? And the barbarian invasion was sort of like a big major thing that was going on in the Monday night group. And the Thursday night group heard about it and was just like, well, guess we'll make sure that we don't, get caught up in that, right? And I think that that's great, right? I think that that was for me as the GM. That was part of the fun. Was I could have events that both groups would hear about, and there would be one that you guys would care about, and they wouldn't, and vice versa.
Yeah, Sean, you were primarily in the Monday night group. Is that track for you? Was that barbarian thing sort of a time where you guys went, yes, here we be heroes?
Yeah, we had a lot of like big damn heroes sort of stuff going on in that campaign. And then hearing stories from you, because you and I had cubes right next to each other at Wizards, the difference between the two groups was really, really funny. I remember one time, because you guys were involved with a lot of like black market stuff and some crime family. And you came in one week and you're like, hey, we had a really big game last night. We did this thing. We like fought off this other thieves guild and blah, blah, blah. And meanwhile, our group had gone under the necropolis and like defeated some major demon. And we're like, yeah, okay, cool. Have fun with your gang lord, man. I killed Moloch.
But it was really fun because I could set up plot lines where, like, the Monday night group was, in contention with some, criminal overlord or something in the city. And the Thursday night group was working with him, right? And it never put the groups at odds, but it always kind of made the groups kind of side-eye each other a little bit, which was, I thought, kind of fun.
And the elves were like, oh, your human group is very, very nice. Yes, have a good time with your heroism and quests. It's great.
Yeah. And we should point out, in case it's not clear to folks, as Sean hinted at when he was talking, we all worked together at the time. Like our cubes were within stone's throw or stick's poke of one another. So the campaigns frequently spilled out into cubicle and hallway conversations the next day, the next week, as we would sort of compare notes. What did you guys do? What are you up to? What level are you guys at? Oh, blah, blah, blah. What did Monty do to you guys? How did he screw you over? That sort of thing. Which made it a lot of fun, right? It was almost like, being back in high school playing together, because we'd see all the other players all the time.
That was fun. That was really cool. You're right. I think every single person, with the exception of the occasional guest star, I think every single person who played in the Ptolus game worked at Wizards, right? Yeah, or at least at the beginning. Yeah.
I mean, there were, I don't know, 10, 12 of us across the years. And yeah, most of them folks working in R&D, but also a few folks from other departments as well. because we're Big Tent.
The thing that comes to mind of this aspect for me is when I got invited to the campaign, because I joined many levels after it had been made. I think my character came in at level 5 or level 7. I don't remember exactly.
5, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And like the way I heard about it, I didn't know the word Ptolus or anything about it. And a fellow player came to me and said, "Why haven't you responded to Monty?" And I don't even remember which player it was. And I was at the time, full disclosure, I was the most junior person of the employees in the Ptolus group. And I'm like, and the vibe was, and Monty's kind of mad at you. And I was like, why? What have I done to Monty? I don't even know Monty. Why would somebody like that be mad at me? Well, you didn't respond to his email. And I go, and sure enough, in my spam folder, there is an invite from Monty to, "Hey, would you like to join my campaign?" And it's like from a week ago. And I'm like, oh, well, now I'm not going to make
spam filter ever.
Yeah. I'm like, now I'm not going to make the team. I'm really disappointed. So that was the invite email in the wizard system of the time.
Well, I'm pretty sure I wasn't mad about it, but I can think of at least 3 different people who were in the game who would have liked to stir up a little trouble and say that I was mad about it.
Every other player, maybe. Perhaps.
True enough. So it, about a month ago, or I don't know, time in COVID period is it doesn't work like normal time. I don't know, like maybe 2 months ago, we had a chat like this with Chris Perkins. And so one of the things that we got to talk about was the fact that he played in both. He played the twins, Circean and Sarai, and would occasionally switch and nobody else would know.
Yes.
And
yeah, because he wouldn't tell us. and the two of you were in cahoots. I remember months later, maybe years later, we're like, Chris was like, "Oh yeah, I just sort of play the characters interchangeably." Like,
well, there was also a ruse. One of Circean's characters was infiltrated a dark elf infiltrated the party disguised as Circean, I believe.
That's right.
And that was happening when I joined.
Oh, okay.
I believe that the dark elf was in place when I joined. And in like my second session, I saw the dark elf somehow. Like I think I had true seeing put on me or something like that. Not a spell I could cast at the time, but somehow I saw that it was a dark elf. And I confess, I just didn't get it. I was just confused, like a new person would be. Like with Chris before, and Chris enjoys a benign amount of messing in a funny way with the other players. So this twins thing, and sometimes they switched, like that seems very much in type. But that he's also playing a dark elf and nobody else knows that. Oh, okay, that's a Chris thing. That's cool. I guess dark elves are all right in Ptolus. I don't know. I just joined. Like it's okay. And unspooling that, it's hard to put into words, but unspooling that was really funny. And I felt very naive as like, oh yeah, I've known he was a dark elf for weeks. What? He's a dark elf?
Yes, you're right. So at one point, Perkins was playing 3 different characters, all of whom looked exactly alike. And one of them was a dark elf. Yes. So have we gone through? So has everybody talked about what character they played? I don't think we did, right? So Andy, tell us about your character.
I played an elf sorcerer who, according to the page I found, was named Vexander Sangreal. Vexander was a particularly headstrong sorcerer. Once I sort of hit reasonable cruising altitude for him and picked up Lightning Bolt as my signature spell, my go-to move when faced with room with only one monster in it was to open the next door, because it's not worth wasting lightning bolt on only one monster. Yeah, Vexander was the character that made me recognize what kind of player I am, because I didn't play a lot before then. I'd been a dungeon master historically for my group. This was the first long-term campaign I had played since grade school. And what I realized looking back on Vexander years later is like, oh, I'm the guy that pokes the trap, right? I'm the guy that presses the button that flips the lever that opens the next door, the instigator. And that sort of opened my eyes and made me appreciate those characters in my own campaign a little bit more.
Didn't at one point, and I want to say that Jesse, you were the one that did this. Didn't you make some kind of a like a random table? Because there was a thing where like the group would decide to retreat.
Yep.
And then you would do any one of like 6 different things, none of which were retreat.
Yes.
And one of them was open the next door.
Yes. Shortly after joining the campaign, I became editor-in-chief of Dragon Magazine. And I probably, what I evaluate as the best, most entertaining editorial that I wrote was about the Company of the Black Lantern doing this thing. And that's where the table appeared. Yes. It was evident on the first session I joined. I'm like, we're in this huge party, we're in this huge fight. And then I think Garioth, Keith Smunk, was the actual door opener that I felt as a player, not the character, but as the player, I felt like, well, that defies logic, because we are losing.
Yes, I definitely remember that Andy, you saying always opening the next door. Yeah, that was definitely on that list of what to do when someone says, let's retreat. Well, you open the next door, of course.
Absolutely.
So Jesse, you briefly mentioned your character, but why don't you tell us a little bit more about him?
Yes, I played Tellian Riverborn, who was a cleric of Navastrum, the god of strength and harmony. And I did not intentionally do this, but even at the time, I vaguely realized that I was the straight person of the group. I was the straight man of the comedy routine. I was the one surprised by the door opening. I was the one asking, why are we talking to the crime lord? I am a good person. I don't hang out with crime lords. Why are we doing these actions that we are, now famous for, I guess, as a party?
That's a valid.
It helps with the comedy, it turns out. Yes, it's not what I would have thought I would have gone for with the group, but it worked for the character. Tellian was not very outgoing in social situations and not comfortable putting himself forward, and that came up a lot of times in the interactions, because Circean and Vexander definitely were, and so it was a fun dynamic. Tellian used his magic to enhance his bow, and mostly in combat behaved as an archer.
Yeah, I remember what most from Tellian is us finding the absolute most potent spell combinations that the cleric could come up with. And then once I picked up haste, figured out how to make you literally 2 characters at once. That was exciting.
Yes.
Yeah, you definitely convinced me that there's an argument to be made in 3rd edition that the best archer was a cleric, right? Not a fighter. Not it's. You were very powerful.
The greater magic weapon stacking on the bow and the arrows was a numerical, relatively benign but numerical exploit of sorts, and we did significant damage to monsters with that combo. And I've never told Andy this, but I do get into the playing tactically optimally as a player, at least to the extent of my abilities. Like that's part of what I enjoyed, Andy. And I would get so mad at Vexander when he didn't cast haste on me in the first round. I'm like, come on.
Give me right now.
So Bruce, tell us about your character.
I was an archer. I started off, I guess, before Jesse. I was Chanticleer of the Order of the Bow and also an elf. And I picked up, I had been working on a project for my job, which was to write a bunch of prestige classes for bow, blood and sword. One of the first things that came out for third edition.
All right.
Wasn't called Blood and
Fist
Sword.
and Fury.
Fist
Right?
and Fury, yeah. Or something like that.
None of us
Tone and Blood was the one I wrote for Wizard.
It was the fighter book.
Yeah, it was the fighter book, yeah. Anyway, I had written a prestige class in that, which was an archery prestige class. I'm like, so I convinced Monty, hey, can I use this prestige class for my archer character? And he's like, sure, of course. And as I was playing it, I guess like Jesse, I really enjoyed the finding all the exploits and all the ways that I could just murderize things downrange from me with this bow. And I realized that I probably had written a slightly broken prestige class because there was one rule in there that allowed me basically to take a 5-foot step backward for free and shoot, right? It's like the one thing that was supposed to limit your ability to be a god with a bow, I had broken with the prestige class. Anyway, after I played this character for a while, I was just like, I don't know. I feel like there's no real challenges for me. I need a different character. I need a fresh taste. And so I left the party to play a wizard minotaur who had some class demerits because of the minotaur prestige class, right? So that was a little bit more of a balanced character. But I love Chanticleer. He was awesome. A little too awesome, I thought. I felt a little guilty about him the entire time I played him.
Sword and Fist, as Andy has reminded us in chat, is
Yay, internet.
Yeah, the very first character book for third edition.
That's right. It was a softcover.
Sean's character is almost completely unknown to me since you were played in the other group, so I want to hear all about him.
Well, I was actually in the company of the Black Lantern for a little bit. I played an elf named Okoru, who was a visitor from outside the city. He did not have a very good command of the common tongue, so he wasn't very much of a talker, which was a contrast of my character in the other group, who was Mr. Chatty, rogue chatty. And unlike the rest of you min-maxers, I was definitely going for a character that was like, mid-range. So in Ptolus, the favorite class for elves is actually sorcerer. I made myself a wizard. So I'm sitting here running around with, D4 hit dice and hoping not to die and having a hard time talking to anybody and shouting out things that are actually correct translations of stuff from the elven language. It was fun running around with you people, and it was great just hanging out with a bunch of elves. And my short time in the group really kind of set off a nice contrast of what was going on in the other group. Like the very fact that you guys had the Company of the Black Lantern as a name, the other group didn't have a name for themselves. And it wasn't until like 12th or 13th level when we realized we should have a nickname for our group too. What are we going to call ourselves? I mean, well, you guys like probably have like a table at the local restaurant with a plaque on it with your name. Two very different psychological profiles for those groups.
Yeah, the Monday Night group probably spent most of their time, cataloging all the ways in which they had to save the world. Too busy to, make up a name. It was really, really fun. I can't stress that enough, how fun it was for me to see the dichotomy and then to have that actually play into the plot lines of the action. And then we, of course, had the occasional session where the two groups came together, for some, really big threat or something that everyone had to get involved in. And then seeing everyone interact was pretty fun, right? I mean, not to be a total nerd, right? But it was a little bit like, the Avengers and the Defenders, having to come together to fight Thanos or whatever.
The Ptolus campaign very specifically inspired me to go big with my own campaign that I had started around that time. I was running a game with some old friends and a couple of new friends, but it just started growing, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, there's too many people. And I said, well, maybe I could run too. And it did the same thing. We were a little more geographically separated, but it was still very much the case that the group groups crossed over occasionally and heard about each other's stories. And it was because of my experiences in the Ptolus campaign that sort of inspired me. Like, yeah, this is a thing you can do. You could run not just 2 campaigns at once, but 2 campaigns in the same world. And in fact, it stuck with me so much that I'm still doing it today. In fact, right now I'm running 3 campaigns in the same world.
Cool.
Because I'm insane.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, at the time, it was really an embarrassment of riches of all of the cool people who wanted to play D&D together, right? And so, like, there was no question at the beginning that I would have to run 2 groups because there were, and we were still, I mean, honestly, kind of turning people away even beyond that, right? Because it was a great time to be working at Wizards. And
yeah, absolutely. And I was going to ask, so it's obviously more work than running just 2 campaigns. I think it's more than double. But for folks who did you think it was twice as hard running 2 campaigns in the same world? Twice as hard as running a campaign? More than that? Less than that? Like, there's synergies, there's things that make it harder. What's your postmortem kind of thing on that?
Well, I mean, obviously you save yourself a lot of grief because you're only doing the world building once, right? And so, God, during the time when I was running these things, like I felt like I knew Ptolus better than I knew the city that I lived in real life, right? I mean, I got to know, all the streets and all the buildings and everything that was in it, and all the major figures, just, where I didn't have to look anything up, right? And that was because, I mean, 2 days a week, or rather 2 nights a week, I'm living there, right? And so I feel like that is a big part of any campaign, right? And so if you're running 2 different campaigns in 2 different places, you're having to switch gears and you're having to kind of, mentally, wrap your mind. Okay, now I'm in this world, right? Now I'm playing Call of Cthulhu, not D&D, and so I've got to, rearrange my brain patterns, and so that you save the time, but you're right in that there is more work in, particularly when you've got events and you've got, I mean, I think there was literally at one point where the company of the Black Lantern, had started a major fire, or maybe you didn't start it, but in the course of a encounter, a major fire was started in a important building, and I had.
We appreciate the passive voice there. Thank you.
Yeah. A fire was started by events.
By events. And the other group, I mean, it's the same city, right? They would see the smoke rising up out of the one district over, right? And so having to work that in somehow, and those, I mean, there were a million things like that, but that's the one that comes to mind. And that just became kind of tricky. I probably kept better notes of the Ptolus campaign as a GM than any other game that I've ever run, just for that reason, right?
Yeah, cool.
I remember some of the work you were doing was you were wrangling timeline stuff, because occasionally one of the groups would be like, well, we want to take 2 weeks off to do this, or, oh, we've been stuck in this dungeon for a week, and the other group was out running around, and the 2 groups kind of ended up getting unsynced in time. And so once the other group became available, you'd have to say, hey, I need you guys to chill for a week and not start any trouble so that we can.
About that. But we were just about to turn to some of the questions from chat. So let's see. So Lareth the Beautiful, that's a great screen name. How did you all choose to be elves? And I think, Andy, I think you mentioned it. I think it just sort of happened.
My recollection is a lot of it was random. I probably chose it because of the favored class thing. I was intrigued by the multi-classing rules in third edition, and like many people at the time, decided that the proper way to play the game was to take 2 levels of rogue and then do something else. So I actually was a sorcerer who dabbled in rogue, and the rules encouraged that. It made that a friendly choice. So for me, it was probably somewhat related to a rules option.
There was some sort of magical bow. Sorry. There was some sort of magical bow that had been in the lore of the previous Praemol game, I believe. And I don't know. I was just fascinated by that. And as Andy actually probably just reminds me that longsword and bow were something you got an advantage with as an elf. I'm like, well, it's decision makes itself, right?
Right. Cool.
And by the time I joined, it was a rule in the email. Right. lost to the spam filter was the instruction, and you will be an elf.
It's possible we were slightly xenophobic.
Well, and and this kind of actually gets into the next question, which is memorable encounters or NPCs from D&D Jester. But we haven't even talked about the fact that I think it was because of that whole dark elf impersonating one or both of Chris's characters that you guys just sort of, as a group, declared war on the dark elves and gathered together a small army and marched down to the dark elf realm that was underneath Ptolus.
You're right.
So that was,
and I had forgotten about that. Yeah, that was epic.
I kind of love that, right? I mean, I think ever since I read Descent in the Depths of the Earth and Vault of the Drow, I wanted to have a party of vengeful elves go down and take on the dark elves, right? Their ancestral enemies.
Well, speaking of memorable NPCs, I now remember how I knew about the dark elf. An NPC named you, as I joined the group, they were in mid-dungeon, and you handled that by saying, a creature, an NPC important to Navastrum, an ogre named Erlenius, or possibly an ogre mage named Erlenius, is anointed by Navastrum and is important to your faith. And you, Tellian, your job is to go make sure he doesn't get dead. And Erlenius said, "Oh, great, you're here. Come on into the dungeon." And we run down to the dungeon and join the company of the Black Lantern. And in all of 3 sentences, you describe this. And then Erlenius says, "Why is there a dark elf with them?" Because it's Erlenius who had the true seeing. Because obviously I was far too low level. Yeah. And Erlenius was a great NPC. You did a funny voice for him, and he had very boisterous actions. And of course, it's memorable because it was my first session, so memorable for me. But that was a great NPC.
There was an organization, a kind of questionable organization in Ptolus that would allow adventurers to bring captured monsters and turn them over for rewards, and then eventually those monsters would come out and they would not be evil anymore. And he was a product of that.
My character thought that sounded horrible. That was just awful.
That was kind of the intention, was, even though the results were good, still pretty creepy.
Yeah. One of the things I remembered when I was in the company of the Black Lantern was us agreeing to keep the crime lord's nephew's performance of a musical, The Boy Who Could Sing. I think I brought this up last time, but it was definitely a Black Lantern thing to keep that safe from being having any sort of issue going on with it. And it was this entire session of trying to keep the music going and the little boy who could sing while there's assassins and gang lord antics and shenanigans going on all around. That backstage, above stage.
Yeah, a great counterpoint to the traditional march through the dungeon, instead defending a fixed location. It was a very nice change of pace and a very creative use of the plot line as well.
Yeah, and I think it worked because I think all of us, had enough of a background. I mean, we knew a little bit of what it was like to be in backstage at right, and so we knew that there was, a catwalk scaffolding over the top, and I'm sure I'm sure Tellian was up there with his bow, and that kind of a thing. We got to play off of all of those, various theater experiences that we had in our lives. That was a lot of fun. Does anybody else have anything, or should I move on to?
I definitely remember a dragon being a perpetual thorn in our sides. There was some giant room, like huge cavern, hundreds and hundreds of feet long, a couple hundred feet wide, something like that. And he would fly out and attack us, and we would be running. And he was a thorn for, I want to say, multiple sessions. Like we'd sneak through hoping to not wake him up and that sort of thing. And I distinctly remember that sort of a recurring monster was very new for me in D&D. Usually you met the monster once and you killed it and it was dead. And that was a really new difference for me.
But was he the dragon then we ended up bribing by bringing the cows through to be like, we're going to feed you?
Yes, I think that's correct.
So
because he was way too strong for us to fight.
I forgot why we had done that. That's right, because he just kept running us out of the dungeon.
Yep, that also another real favorite moment of mine was you guys having to figure out, how are we going to get this cow over the pit trap?
There was, I'm stretching my memory a little bit. There was, as the Thursday group always seemed to have fewer players than the Monday group, at least in the era that I was in. It was a little bit smaller. And we were busy adults, so often we would have only three players, but you still ran the session, and we would hire a mercenary whose name I don't remember, and this mercenary died multiple times, and we would pay to resurrect him. And he slowly lost levels so much that we kind of ruined his life because he could not adventure with us anymore because he was just like one round of I
want to say that was a dwarf who had a big gun.
Yeah, it was a dwarf with a big gun. And we would hire that dude, and then he would adventure with us until he died, and he would lose a level, and we would resurrect him. And we would reluctantly go seek out his services again. And we would say, let's hope he doesn't die this time. And then he would.
I mean, were we just lazy? We couldn't find another mercenary? Was that it? Like we only had one friend in the entire city?
I think you were just not very trusting. I think once you found somebody you trusted, you kind of latched onto them.
And you probably had a bit of a reputation at that point, too. It's like, oh, everybody who works with them dies. No, I'm busy.
And I remember it being presented as fait accompli. Oh, this is just the guy we get. And he sometimes dies.
I know a guy. Yeah.
A dwarf who sometimes dies.
I have to admit, I do not remember his name, but I'm positive that he's in the book.
So what else do the fans want to know?
What do any of you consider to be your character's biggest blunder? Do you remember anything that went horribly awry?
So I don't know. I felt awkward in this moment. The one great big joint session that I remember, you, by the way, Monty, I'm still miffed about this. I don't know if you remember, but you turned magic off. You said no magic works. So for 12 hours of joint session or something like that, like some epic amount of time, I was a fighter with 3/4 attack bonus. To the point where Eric Mona says, like, kind of. I mean, Eric's a good friend of mine, so I don't mean anything by this, but a little bit like he was like, "What does your guy do?" kind of thing. Like just as like, "Hey, buddy," as an aside, your dude's kind of crap. Maybe you can fix that between sessions or something like that. And so that's the part I remember as being like I was really out of my element and felt like, oh. This is not with the whole world not having magic. My character's shtick is just destroyed.
I think it was only one day, right? It was like the black rain that comes every.
I must have missed that session because otherwise I would have been even more useless than you were.
I'm now remembering that day, but I think I might have been in the other group because we were all on the wall because weren't the barbarians attacking at that time?
No, I was on the wall. That's how little I did.
Okay.
You do not remember that it was a joint session.
That's why the barbarians were attacking, right? Because they're like,
right. That's good timing. Because I remember we had, or you guys had there's this vampire who walked around with all these sorts of protective spells and was a buddy to a group. And he's like, I'm going to be fine. I could walk around the daylight. And then magic stops working and all those protective spells went away and the sun just obliterated him right there. And we were thinking, yeah, vampire on our side. Oh, dust on our side.
That might have, I don't know whether that was the vampire that turned all of us into vampires or the lich that did it or whatever.
No, he was like a henchman of the crime lord you were friends with.
Got it. Because that was probably like not our darkest moment, but it's definitely a not great moment for the company, the Black Lanterns, to lose a fight against the big bad and be turned into his minions. At the time felt like a colossal failure. But the great thing that came out of that, and one of the big lessons that I took away was, as a dungeon master, you've got to find ways to turn those failures into more story, make them yes ands. And so, like, instead of us all just being dead, we became vampiric minions that were sent around in the dungeon doing things, not able to actively work against our master, but certainly able to think about doing it. And I don't remember exactly how we got out, but I'm sure there was some conniving that went on where we sort of figured out, well, how can we get out of this without, doing it ourselves, convince other people to do it, what have you. And it was a fun change of pace for a few sessions to have to play these characters in different ways.
Yep. That's really cool because one of the things that we are talking about in the upcoming Cypher System book is about mind control and how you lose player agency, and giving players the option to say, you can do all of these things, you just can't do this, is a really cool way of getting players to accept, all right, yes, I'm mind controlled, but I'm still in control of my character and what they want to do.
It's a good point. Yeah. I think that, I'm pretty sure that is the only TPK that I have ever had in maybe ever.
Incorrect.
No,
that's not even the only company of Black Lantern TPK.
Are you sure?
Yeah, our campaign ended with a TPK.
Yeah,
the dark elves that we had been fighting for so many levels finally brought out their biggest guns, and we fought and we killed so many of them, but we could not kill enough. And I remember Vexander specifically was hoist on his own petard of disintegration. I had been using that spell rather blithely, and then finally was on the receiving end of it. And I think there's another
like half of a TPK, which is the way we got out of being vampires is our very powerful twin NPC allies, who were, I think, both powerful clerics, or one paladin and one cleric. They came and liberated us, and they knew we were vampires. And that dungeon crawl with us as powerful vampires ended technically in a loss to them, but we were as players, we were very happy for our allies to come and get us out of that situation. But yeah.
Yes, I know that was it was a paladin and a cleric who were kind of big in the Keepers of the Veil organization.
Yes. And it was a great RP moment too, because they apologized for both sending us to the place where we got turned into vampires and having to come down and kill us to make us not be vampires anymore. And they were just really apologetic, and we're like, no, it's all right.
So D&D Jester asks, can you think of like an adventure or a scene or something that happened that could only have taken place in Ptolus and nowhere else?
I remember that because we spent so much time in the dungeons, we got to know to the dungeons. There was one that we used a lot, but eventually that entrance was so far away from the spot we wanted to adventure in that we needed to find other places. So like we got into the dungeon and we wandered through completely other dungeons, like through an asylum or a prison or something, and got into another dungeon. So the concept of of sneaking through dungeon B to get into dungeon C because dungeon A you've already cleared out and is too big to walk through. Like that felt to me like a very Ptolus kind of moment. That there are all these things, this giant environment of multi-dungeonness.
Something a little bit more. Go ahead.
No, please, Bruce. Go ahead.
Trivial was that we could just going back into the dungeon. This happened more early on, but the whole Boomtown aspect of it meant we could just go stock up on rubber balls you could throw down the corridor. So hopefully get some traps, right? And candles and 10-foot poles, right? 10-foot poles were back in vogue. So we did that quite a few times. And, then we're in the dungeon 10 minutes later.
For me, it was, the premise that Ptolus is a city of magic. People know about wizards and spellcasters and stuff. And there are laws that say, hey, you're not allowed to charm people. And I think it was Vexander who was going to say,
I was unaware of that particular law. I was not from around here. It's not my fault. It's not my fault.
So why don't you finish the story because it's about your character. I just happened to be there.
I mean, if you're a sorcerer and you pick Charm Person as one of your spells, you have to use it. Otherwise, it's just wasting time there. Yeah, I remember I probably went to jail. It was bad. I just remember being sort of dumbfounded, like, what? Why can't I? Is this no problem where I'm from?
Because the write-up in the book says that the city often has, like, people who are invisible, like watching merchants to make sure that nobody's casting charm magic on them. So you charmed a merchant because you want to get a nice big fat discount on something. And out of the invisibility pops this guy. It's like, you're under arrest. And you're like, crap.
For me, it is one of the things I always liked about Ptolus is, Monty, you did a great job of layering ideas on ideas on ideas. And we had always heard about this association called the inverted pyramid. And again, on this day where you turned off magic, which really, it sort of blew. Yeah, it blew my mind. I had not ever, right place, right time. I hadn't had a DM who showed so clearly, look, you can change the rules of your world. And the fact that it was really stark and affected a lot of characters, made it have a lot of impact. But also, it really felt fair. It felt like, well, this is a thing. The black rain comes sometimes. This is a thing that you can predict with astrology or whatever, and it comes every couple of years and it's confined to 24 hours. Like it made it feel fair, but also like the ideas layered upon ideas. That day we looked up. We never knew where the inverted pyramid was, but that day we looked up, and above Ptolus was an upside down pyramid where the people who knew about it knew that it was there and the rest of us didn't. And you're like, now everybody can see the inverted pyramid. And that felt like, oh, like this thing has been here for the whole time. And it was really like you saw it from the beginning. And yeah, that it just like added to that day. As an aside, oh, we've discovered where the inverted pyramid is. Big mystery for the campaign. But that doesn't matter because there are a bunch of barbarians over there. Like that was a very Ptolus moment.
I think that it's actually a piece of DMing advice that certainly came out of Ptolus, and that is, if you're going to do something big, like take away magic because there's this weird rainstorm, show that it is screwing up the NPCs as much as it is screwing up the PCs, right? Because otherwise you start to feel like, oh, the DM's just being mean, right? I remember now that vampire just turning to dust, and the inverted pyramid and a bunch of other stuff. Because there are a bunch of really powerful, magically enhanced people in Ptolus, and some of them were way more screwed over than the PCs were without magic. And I think that helps players. I know it helps me when I'm playing to see that, right? That things aren't just pointed at me, right? Just because I'm a player character.
It is a world, and
right.
Things affect each other. I actually have a question that I've been thinking about for a long time, actually, for Ptolus. I've never known the answer to this, which is how much of it existed either on paper or in your head before you started running the campaign versus laying the track literally right in front of us?
All of the big concepts were there, right? Big spire, horrible castle at the top, pretty bad castle halfway up, big dungeon underneath. I knew that there was a dwarven city there. I knew there was a dark elf stronghold there. But like I hadn't, that was just it, right? Dwarven Hearth was a name and I knew it was down there. But until anybody was going to get close to it, I hadn't started working on it. And I'm sure it showed. Like, remember, right by one of the most common entrances in the dungeon is a place called Delver's Square, which is kind of built around this place, right? And the tavern that you guys all went to, and actually, no, you guys didn't go there so much because the elves had their own tavern that you guys went to.
That's right. That's right.
But like all of that was sort of done from the beginning. It's kind of like, to go way, way back, right? In the first edition DMG, Gary, said, design your campaign in concentric circles, right? Start with one location and spread out. And I did that, right? But I started with Delver Square and like one little dungeon under it and kind of went from there.
Yeah, I use a similar model for my games. I think of it a little more as a spiral where the characters are spending a lot of their time here and then they're slowly going further and further from that home safe spot. And don't design out here while you're still here. Have some ideas, but
right.
Ptolus was in some ways, it was sort of an open world game. At least the dungeons felt that way, right? Like we could go almost any direction anytime we wanted. We were much more, I think, sort of player-directed story for a lot of it. Like we would grab onto a storyline and then you'd spin it out for us. But like, I don't remember many times where you would be like, okay, this is your quest, go do it. So you were reacting to us, I think, a lot.
Yes, that is true, and that is kind of what I really wanted. And I will say that the Thursday night group was more self-directed than the Monday night group. Like when I said to them, okay, what do you guys want to do? I mean, I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but they essentially said, let's go find the quest that will help, save the world. And you guys were like, let's go make some money.
There's this huge dungeon right here.
Yeah.
A thing along those lines, a thing I appreciated a bunch and have used also as a DM is locations, both dungeon and more benign, that the players visit multiple times to the point where and I really took that from Ptolus. It's a thing we did all the time. In fact, by the time I did the group, the party was almost always doing it, saying, yes, we have been to this dungeon before. For reasons, we only explored 3/4 of it. We definitely want to go back there, but not right now. We want to go do this other dungeon that we've also been in before. And of course, in order to prepare for that, we need to stop by these locations and talk to these NPCs that we know by name. And going to those things multiple times, that just really felt like, oh yeah, that's why we're in this city.
Well, Ptolus for me was very much a reaction to the campaign that I had just finished under second edition, which was a world-spanning, big travel, never encounter the same NPC twice kind of thing. And I remember literally thinking, I'm putting all this work into these NPCs and the players are talking to them for 5 minutes and then going off and doing their thing and never coming back. Wouldn't it be fun to create a centralized location so that, when you went to the tavern, it was always the same tavern, right? And you got to know the people in there and you got to know the regulars and you became regulars yourself. So yeah, I tried to keep it all open-ended, but I think I did say to you guys at the outset, the only rule that I have is don't leave the city, right? This is the campaign.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I really liked that concentrated adventure feel. The sense that we always knew where to go to have fun, right? Because what we wanted to do, at least what I wanted to do, was I wanted to roll dice, right? I wanted to roll dice and slay monsters and explore and find treasure and have heroic stories to tell after with my friends. And the fact that we didn't have to wander around looking for that. We knew where to go. Like, that was really strong. I ran a campaign a few years ago where I sort of took that a couple steps further and just threw the characters in room 1 of the dungeon with no exit behind them, and just told them, you will be in this dungeon for levels 1 through 10. Keep going down to find the exit. And they're all just like, great, love it. And like, there was no need to go out to a tavern or anything like that. It was whatever they had on them and found along the way. That was all their loot. And that was sort of an immensely exciting and tense campaign, because like early on, the most exciting treasure hoards were like, we found a backpack.
I think that yeah, the important lesson there is, kind of let people know what the rules are, right? And if everyone signs off on that, it's great, right? Because what would be more frustrating than having someone in a campaign like you just described, Andy, who just spends the whole time trying to get out, right? And
right,
butting up against the very premise of the campaign.
Yeah. So for instance, nobody rolled up a character who was all about interacting with NPCs.
Right.
Like, and living in the city, like, because they knew from the get-go, it's like, yeah, sure, you can try to talk to the goblins, but let's be honest about what's going to happen here.
So we got this is from the web coder. I know you. Hi. So he's asking about the story of Eric Mona's character getting the word written on his the phrase written on his face. It was in a joint session, but that was really kind of not your guys' storyline. But very, very briefly, he had a character. He was an Aasimar. He was beautiful and prided himself on his appearance. And there was a long-running villain named Helmut Edelstein, and he really, really hated a Helmut Edelstein had come into this dungeon. It was actually the place that was in the middle of the Spire, Gothgulgamel. And again, I think this was a joint session. I think you were all there, but you confronted the fiery demigod that lives there now, and the demigod had actually killed Helmut, and Eric's character said, I need proof. I have to go back to the city and have proof that he's dead. And so the demigod just wrote in fire burning scars that just said Helmut Edelstein is dead on his character's forehead. Don't know if you guys remember that, but that was definitely one of my favorite moments. Mona was great at creating characters that everyone sort of hated, but he was okay with that, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like when they got their comeuppance, he would be totally on board.
In a different campaign, he played a delightful character called Barbatos Kem, who was a wizard. And the Barbatos Kem moment I remember is there was a beautiful, voluptuous drow statue, and you very vividly described that the lips were made of flesh, but the rest of the statue was stone. And we're just like all looking at each other, and we're like, Barbatos is going to kiss that statue. And sure enough, when the rest of the party turned their backs, Eric Mona's character Barbatos went over and kissed the statue, and bad things resulted, and it was awesome.
What was your name in that follow-on campaign, Jesse?
I did not know there was going to be a quiz. I did not prepare for that.
Oh, okay. I was the doghead.
Tharn?
Archinemus.
I was Tharn and you were Archinemus, yes.
Yes, all right. Sorry.
I have to admit, I love stuff like that, right? Because, you think to yourself, well, nobody's going to kiss the statue. But you know
will.
someone's going to kiss the statue.
Yes.
It's one of the, it's that is just an inherent joy of being a DM, right? Is putting stuff like that in your game. You know, oh, there's a lever, right? And not only that, but you know when you design that room and put the lever in, you know who's going to pull it, right?
Yep.
I'd forgotten about the statue with the flesh lips. That is like the modern take on the great green devil face. It's just so twisted and weird.
Yep.
Oh my gosh. Thanks for reminding me of that. Wow.
I mean, that's the joy of knowing your player group, right? Having played with them for years and years. I mean, particularly Monty coming into that campaign. Like, you had some players in that group that you had been gaming with for a long time. Like, I was a newcomer to that group. Jesse, a little bit later, was a newcomer to that group. But like, you knew Sean, you knew Bruce, you knew Michelle. These were folks that you knew what buttons to press to get them to do things. And there's a joy to that. The privilege of having long time gaming buddies that you just know, oh, yep. If I put a big alchemist table full of fragile stuff, Dennis is going to run up there and flip that table over and not understand why everything explodes.
I realized that over a long period of gaming with Monty, he has a long track record of setting up romantic interests for my characters that are never going to happen. Like, every single campaign, it's like, oh, here's this person that Sean's character is going to totally fall in love with, and she's just going to rebuff him, or she's going to betray him, or whatever. Every single one.
Wait a minute, Sean. That makes it sound like I'm setting you up for heartbreak every time.
Yes.
I think that's what he's saying.
Your character, Shuren, ended up with the barmaid at the Ghost of the Control.
Yes. But the condition was that she wouldn't date adventurers, so he had to retire from adventuring before he could settle down with her.
Well, when the campaigns were over, we did a sort of a, what happens to everybody later, and that was part of Sean's after retirement. Yeah. Let's see. I'm gonna skip to a couple of questions that have more to do with you guys. Here's a question. Did you move room by room in the dungeons all the time, or did we hand wave segments that we'd been through before? And we definitely hand waved unless something had changed, because that was, a couple of you have mentioned about, like, there was a lot of that, right? There was a lot of going back to the same places that you had already been. And that was very intentional. I wanted Ptolus to be dungeon as wilderness, right? And so in the same way that when you go off into the wilderness, the parts that are close to the borders of civilization, you go through them many, many times, and the dungeons kind of turned out to be the same way. And that was fun because I could throw surprises in, like, oh, that room that you cleared out now has, a new group of kobolds that have moved in or whatever, right?
Right. But you didn't overdo it. You didn't make us literally fight through the same rooms every time. Eventually it felt like we were pushing out the boundaries of civilization sort of into the dungeon. And periodically something would come in and we'd fight it, and that would be different and cool. Sometimes we fight it on the way coming out, as I recall, which is always crazy, right? Like, D&D parties get really good about figuring out when they're done adventuring for the day. So throwing that one more encounter at them when they think they're tapped is always fun and terrifying.
Yeah.
I had a very forgiving spawn rate. Like some video games.
Two things. One, we also were lucky enough to play with your extensive Dwarven Forge library. So we did a lot of, yes, we moved to the next room when we were in new territory. Yes, we moved to the next room because we can see it on the board, and it's sort of inviting us to go over there. And two, is now the time when we can talk about Chris Perkins' preternatural ability to pilot us through all these dungeons from memory by describing room and door, and oh no, but 20 feet later, there's a trap there. So we press the blue knob and that opens the thing on 3 levels down. And so now we can go left. And it's like, okay.
I mean, I just assume he hacked Monty's computer, right?
You're right. He has an uncanny ability to remember dungeons in detail, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I wonder if he still does. wonder if he still does that. I haven't gamed with him in a long time, which is something that makes me sad because Chris is a good guy to game with.
Absolutely.
Well, let's actually talk about like post Ptolus. You know, you guys are all still big gamers and whatnot. What you know, as players or as GMs, is there anything that happened in your time with Ptolus that has wormed its way into the present day or that thereabouts?
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, yes, I am running basically what is an homage to Ptolus. So I ran a campaign in a world of my own creation that was like your Premal game, just an epic journey campaign, and it was great. And the follow-up to that was heavily inspired by Ptolus. In the center of the world map, there's a great big crater that was caused by an ancient event, like huge, like almost as big as a city, and it destroyed an ancient city. And around that crater are little frontier towns from different nations in the world. And underneath the crater are infinite dungeons, levels, very much Ptolus, including a renamed and reskinned Dwarven Hearth, where there was, I think the Monday group opened Dwarven Hearth, but like I wrote a puzzle adventure for them to open this Dwarven city. And that was very, very Ptolus, to the point where in the town where the party is based, there is a Delver's Square homage called the Boasting Square. And I sort of made up a tradition and it physically looks a little bit like Delver's Square, but the tradition is when a party goes down under the Crucible, that's the name of this great big crater, they come back and they boast about their adventures and show off their treasures in the Boasting Square. And that is a direct follow-on from Delver's Square and the dungeon-oriented stuff around it. Yeah. And really, the reason I did that was a similar reason is after the Epic Travel campaign, I wanted, like, the foundational rule of this campaign is, you know, make a reason for your character to want to adventure in the Crucible. That's where we are going to be. And so we get the repeat dungeons. Oh, another similarity to Ptolus is there isn't a great big spire, but in this world, I just like floating rock islands in fantasy worlds. I have a soft spot for them. And there are a bunch of them above the Crucible. And yes, you are going there at the end of the campaign. Like that, like, look, it's up there. Yeah.
I am a big fan of that model where, you know, even at first level, you can see, oh, that's what we're going to do when we're 20th, right?
For me, the Ptolus campaign represented an opportunity to level up my own skills. I mean, I had been playing D&D at that point for 15 years, whatever. And obviously I was great at it. But it was the first time that I'd really sat down with other professional gamers, as opposed to just my friends. So seeing how other people played their characters, and even more so seeing the care that went into creating and running this very intricate campaign. Like it was very much like, you know, going in on a job internship and watching like, oh, this is how it's done. So like there are a lot of lessons that I took away from that campaign as a dungeon master, because that's what I am more than a player. And then sort of at a very direct level, just the running multiple campaigns at once, I now can't not do it. I've done it 3 times, sometimes with as many as 3 games going and 18 different players playing characters, and like it's insane, and I love it. I love crafting the stories that can intertwine and having the characters, sometimes characters hopping around between campaigns and plots going on and that sort of thing. And that all came directly out of my experiences with playing the Ptolus campaign.
Every time I think about that aspect of Ptolus, I because I'm a big comics nerd, right? It keeps going back to comics, right? Like, yeah, these are the Avengers, but sometimes they also hang out with Spider-Man, and sometimes Captain America goes and hangs out with the Fantastic Four. I love that, right? We were creating the Ptolus cinematic universe before that was a thing.
And as you pointed out, we had the unbelievable privilege of being surrounded by not only gamers but good gamers that we wanted to play with. I mean, one of the things that was always foreign for me was when I would talk to people outside my game who were like, oh, I'm struggling to find players and our games never stick together, because that had never been my experience. I had a very stable group for many years. I still game with people that I knew when I was 10 years old. So like that kind of privilege as a dungeon master is amazing. It's an amazing tool to be able to have such stability in a group for that long.
Yeah, I agree. That's great. Sean, Bruce, do you have anything you wanted to throw out there?
You know, I was just thinking this is kind of pre-Ptolus, but I was running a campaign in college and you were running a campaign in college, Monty. And do you remember we each took our parties, our players' characters, and we sent the what they were to each other and had, in a sort of meta way, the other party interact with the party from the other campaign. And Monty was in a different state than me. And of course, I don't know that anyone ever from either party ever realized it, but we realized it. And it was like this sort of like, this is really cool sort of thing. So it reminds me of players going into the different groups, you know, not quite as an immediate payoff, but, you know, had its own payoff.
For me, I think mainly it was just the attention to detail for NPC names. I know that you make lists of NPCs names ahead of time and maybe just put together a couple of characteristics for those so that if we spontaneously run into a character, you can pick a name for them, throw in a couple of personality traits, and you have a character. And you've done that for Ptolus, you've done that for Invisible Sun. And one of the cool things I think that has stuck with me to this day is you have a very distinct style for naming things. And sometimes it's just a little trick. Like the fact that you have Jevika Nor in Ptolus, to me, I heard that name. I'm like, that is basically the name Jessica, but with a V instead of an S. I'm like, you know what? You can create an entire set of interesting names by just swapping one letter. Like, okay, I'm going to make a bunch of names. Instead of S, they're going to be V. So you're going to have like Vanuel something and Jevika this and that. And like that makes it have a cool fantasy flavor. And you have the entire real world as a library of names to draw from. So you don't ever have to be like, oh, this person's name is Rolf.
And you don't have to rely on extra apostrophes or strings of consonants.
I think it's a good trick because I think it triggers in our brain in a specific way. You know, as English speakers, it sounds like a name. Jevika sounds like a name because it sounds like Jessica, even though you don't necessarily automatically think of Jessica. Yeah. Yeah. For me, it was certainly, Ptolus was certainly a high point of my entire career of running Dungeons and Dragons. Just great players, great fun. I think I speak probably for most GMs when I say that, one of the greatest things that keeps things from ever getting boring is when you have players that challenge you, right? We talk all the time about DMs that challenge the players, but you need it both ways, right? And Ptolus was filled with that, and that was always super fun, right? Oh, you guys are going to go there? Oh, okay. Right. And scrambling, in case that wasn't someplace that I had prepared for, and figuring out, ahead of time what things were going to be so that doesn't happen the next time. But of course it happens the next time because I didn't expect the next thing you were going to do, which, is awesome. And, a lot of that, like Sean, the little characters that you're talking about and coming up with names and stuff, that was so useful when it came to producing the actual Ptolus book, because, every district, for example, has like these, man on the street kind of NPCs that you just might run into, for that time when the players, because they always do, say, well, we stopped someone on the street and we asked them blah, 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 right? I already had all those made because you guys had already done it. And I had to keep track of those names. And So that so much of the Ptolus book was already written by the time I sat down to write it, because I mean, that stuff is all, I mean, very few exceptions. That stuff is just all from the campaigns. That's why I can confidently say, you know, as a product, this will take, you know, this will be more than you can have in your campaign, because I happen to know that there are at least 3 campaigns in there, right? And
yeah, right.
Yeah. So you know, I didn't intend for that to sort of be the wrap up question, but you guys all kind of made it a nice wrap up question in your answers of you know, kind of what you carried forth from Ptolus. So that's great. So let's kind of end the Ptolus. You know, we could keep talking for hours, right? Because that's the way campaigns work, and it's fun actually to watch as each one of us is like, oh yeah, right. But I wanted Andy and Jesse to give you guys a chance to talk about maybe something cool that you're working on, if there's something that you can talk about.
Sure. I work for a game company called Pocket Gems, and I do game design for a game called War Dragons. And it's a mobile free-to-play game, and I play it every day. And check it out.
How do you find it?
Oh, Android, iOS. It's a game that's been out for a while.
Just War Dragons. Cool.
War Dragons. Yep.
Awesome.
Yep.
I am currently working at a studio in Seattle called Undead Labs, as the shirt would suggest. Our franchise is called State of Decay. It's a post-apocalyptic zombie survival game. The thing I like most about it is that it involves shooting and combat and things like that, but it's more about, just as much about resource management and community building. One of the big twists of the game is that you don't play one sort of superhero character. You play your entire community, and you can swap back and forth between the various characters. So I'm going to play the super stealthy character. No, I'm going to play the former soldier. Now I'm going to play the doctor. Exploring the world and gathering resources and having to plan a long-term strategy for your community, as well as managing the moment-to-moment surviving zombie attacks, that sort of thing. I'm the lead writer at the studio, so I'm responsible for all the words that come out. The big lesson that I brought the studio from my RPG times was making sure that a second person sees everything that's written. The biggest freak out moment for me when I moved from tabletop games to computer games is that there's no editors in the vast majority of studios. Don't, like, somebody will write some words. Maybe it's a designer, maybe it's a writer, maybe it's just, you know, a UI engineer, and they'll just go into the game. Nobody will ever question them. And I made it my job from day one. Like, no, somebody else is going to see those words. Make it me. And so that's a lot of fun. I focus more on writing the game design, but I do get to work on designery things now and again, because the rest of the staff there recognize, oh yeah, he knows how to do that stuff too. So it's nice to mix both. I get to write a lot more dialogue than I used to, which is, it turns out, it's a lot of fun. Spending time in recording booths with professional voice actors, listening to them turn your lines into actual voice it's pretty amazing. It's
really cool. Agreed.
So yeah, that's what I'm doing.
But you guys are both still tabletop role playing.
Yeah,
absolutely. And in fact, I just started up a series of campaigns, and Jesse is in one of them. Even though he is currently living 800 miles away, turns out that's not a barrier anymore. So
right. Yeah, I have had a pretty stable group here in the Bay Area for years now, and I've run 2 games in the same world, the same campaign world. And had a lot of fun doing it.
Cool. And Sean and Bruce, we know what you're working on. Actually, it's probably worth mentioning, Sean, you're starting to work on the Ptolus conversion.
Yeah, like right now I'm going through the book and saying, oh, prestige classes aren't a thing in 5th edition or Cypher System. What will we do to do that in these games? So that's a fun analytical dive into the book from a game mechanics perspective.
One of the chat questions that was asked was, how is Ptolus going to be different how is Ptolus going to feel different in 5e? And I hope the answer to that is not very, right? Because Ptolus was always meant to be very D&D with a volume turned up to 11, right? And it'll still be that. But things like prestige classes and those mechanical aspects, we'll just find other ways to do them.
I was on the topic of the three of you guys continuing to work together. I was actually just commenting to my wife earlier before this stream that how impressive and amazing it is that you guys have been collaborating on various projects at multiple companies over decades now, right? Like that's a really impressive string, and it shows how well you get along with each other as well. There are not many relationships that can last the 30 plus years that these professional relationships have. There's something to be said for that. So kudos.
Thanks. Yeah. I won't speak for them, but I think it's going well.
Totally.
And Bruce, you are in the middle of working on a cool thing. You want to talk about it really quick? Since we
sure. It's called Edge of the Sun, and basically it's a science fiction. It's a Numenera project, but it's kind of taking you even a little bit more science fiction slant towards this vast artifact that it turns out exists around the around the sun. There's a lot more to it that I probably don't want to give away, but it's called the Engine of the Gods for a reason, and it seems like it hasn't been working the last couple hundred years. It's a pretty fun project.
Cool.
That sounds like a Bruce Cordell project, right? If somebody had just given me that pitch and said, "Who do you think is writing this?" Well, I mean, duh.
It's you're right. And it fell into my lap here at MCG, so yay! It worked out somehow. I don't know.
Yeah,
we like to joke in our group that there are certain character archetypes that some players have, but for Bruce, I think it's story archetypes, right? I could always identify a Bruce project when it was coming down the pipe. They were always incredibly creative. Like they would take the starting point that anybody else would have, and then layer on 6 more levels of twists and creativity.
I've been using, in that campaign that I talked about, I've been using some Jade Colossus material, adapted a little bit, but it's been a good fit.
Cool. Well, thank you guys so much for giving us a couple of hours of your evening here to talk about old times. It's been really fun. It's been really great to hang out with you again. And for those of you watching, like we said, we're getting work on the conversions now. We're still shooting for next spring for the release of that. Ptolus is a big book, and it's a lot of work, but it's going to be fun. And we're doing 2 of them, right? So we had to come up with a plural, Ptoli, since we're doing a 5e and a Cypher version.
I assume you're updating all the words, right? Not.
Yes, because English has changed a lot in the last 15 years.
Well, thanks for having us. It was a blast.
Yeah, this was fun. Always nice to hang out with you guys.
Yeah, absolutely.